Greetings, everyone. This is Rock and Roll Spot Connection with our beginning of our Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Magic the Gathering unboxing series. And we will be starting off with the set's pre-constructed commander decks. We've got two different ones. First off, we've got Upgrades Unleashed, which is a Gruel deck. For those unaware with the terminology, Gruel refers to the combination of red and green mana. It comes from the Ravnica blocks as the red-green, or the guild that is represented in game by red and green are the Gruel clans. Presumably, this is so that being the case, this is probably a fairly stompy deck. So I'm kind of looking forward to that, actually. I'm always a fan of stompy stuff in Magic. So, let's set this aside and we'll start off with... Well, get started. So, first off, a few points for if you are not that familiar with Magic the Gathering. So, Commander. Commander is a, generally speaking, a multiplayer format. Well, it can be a two-player format. It can also be multiplayer, but it differs slightly in some of its rules from traditional Magic. As traditionally speaking, in a Magic deck, your deck must consist of at least 60 cards, and with the exception of basic lands, you can have no more than 4 copies of any one card in your deck, unless, of course, the card is on the restricted list in the format you're playing. In Commander, all cards are restricted except for basic lands. Also, you have a... Let's see, you can only... So you only have 1 copy of any one non-basic land card in your deck. Also, you have your deck must have at least 1 legendary creature, which is the deck's commander. The colors of the deck are then built around the color identity of your commander. Usually the color identity would be just the mana cost, so red and green in the case of Chishiro, the Shattered Blade. However, sometimes also you might have a commander who maybe would be red-green in cost, but then have a black-costed ability in their text. That means they are red-green-black for their color identity. You can only have cards of the colors in your commander's color identity in your deck. And 100 cards. No more, no less. I'm sure there's someone that's probably put together a small, less than 100 card commander deck, but generally speaking, 100 cards, at least max. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into building one of these, and we'll be getting into building commander decks at some point in the near future. I've kind of been toying with some ideas, so I haven't done a Magic unboxing in a while though. So, and I'm honestly a big fan of the Kamigawa. Kamigawa as a setting for Magic first appeared in the first Kamigawa block, first and so far, and now an old. But anyway, it's heavily based on, like most planes, it is largely the inspiration for it largely comes from a specific culture. In this case, mainly Japan, but largely Asia. The original Kamigawa block featured samurai, as well as spirits and ninjas. So, yeah, mostly, like I said, mostly speaking, it's inspired by, it's got a heavy Japanese influence. But Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, featuring the first full-blown return to Kamigawa, is being somewhat heralded as a cyberpunk Magic the Gathering set. So, yeah. Anyway, so we'll start off by looking at the deck's commander. Well, so pre-constructed commander decks tend to have multiple commanders. So you got options, but yeah, we'll start with Chishiro, the Shattered Blade. Shiro is a 4/4 legendary snake samurai for 2 colorless and 1 red and 1 green. Whenever an aura or equipment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 red spirit creature token with Menace. Okay. Menace, if I remember correctly, is they can only be blocked. They can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures, or it could be the opposite. Actually, it'll say on the token. Can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. Okay. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each modified creature you control. Modified applies to characters who have equipment on them, auras, or counters. Okay, alright. Next, we have Kaima the Fractured Calm. Kaima is a 3/3 legendary spirit for, 2 colorless, 1 red, and 1 green. At the beginning of your end step, goad each creature your opponent controls that's enchanted by an aura you control. Put a +1/+1 counter on Kaima the Fractured Calm for each creature goaded this way. Until your next turn, the goaded creatures attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than you if able. That's kind of cool. Okay, so next up we have the Orochi Merge Keeper. A 1/1 Snake Druid for 1 colorless and 1 green. Can be tapped to add 1 green mana. As long as it is modified, it has tap, add 2 green mana. Okay, alright. I can see some use there. I got some green decks that'll like seeing that guy. The Orochi Snake People were also a major faction within the old Kamigawa block. Quite useful. I think it was a point like 15, 16 years ago. I was actually working on an Orochi deck. Next up, we have Invigorating Hot Spring. It's an enchantment for 1 colorless, 1 red, and 1 green. Invigorating Hot Spring enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Modified creatures you control have haste. Remove a +1/+1 counter from Invigorating Hot Springs. Put 1 on target creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery and only once each turn. Okay. Next, we have the Tawashi Guidebot. It's a artifact creature construct for 4 colorless mana, power toughness of 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. 4 colorless, tap, draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each modified creature you control. Okay, that's cool. I like that. That's really neat. Next up, we've got Walking Skyscraper, an 8/8 artifact creature construct for 8 mana. This spell costs 1 mana less to cast for each modified creature you control. Has trample, hexproof as long as it's untapped. Okay, alright, that's always useful. Next up, we have Acidic Slime, which is a reprint. It's a 2/2 green ooze for, 3 colorless and 2 green. Has Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. Okay, that's one thing with these pre-constructed decks, that you get a lot of reprints. Next up, we have a green instant, Beast Within. Costs 2 colorless and 1 green. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Okay, alright. Next up, we have Fertilid, a 0/0 elemental for 2 colorless and 1 green. Enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. For 1 colorless, 1 green, and removal of +1/+1 counter. Target player searches their library for a basic land card, puts it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffles. Generally speaking, that's probably going to be you doing that, so, yeah. And remember, once its power toughness is just 0/0 with nothing adding to it, well, yeah, it's considered, it goes to the graveyard. Next up, we've got an instant, Hunter's Insight, which costs 2 colorless and 1 green. Seems to be seeing a pattern of instance. Choose target creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. Ooh, I like that. I'd like to see a version of that as an enchantment, but hey, that would make a fun aura. Oh, that would be a nasty aura. Next up, we have Kodama's Reach, sorcery for 2 colorless and 1 green. It is also listed as arcane. The old Kamigawa block had a mechanic called Splice, which generally splice onto arcane, allowing you to splice an arcane spell onto a splice onto arcane card. Kodama's Reach. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards, put one onto the battlefield tapped, and the other into your hand. Then shuffle. Okay. This is Kodama's Reach is actually something a card I've been working into a lot of my green commander decks lately. So, well, when I say green, commander decks that feature green. So yeah. Next up, we have Loyal Guardian, a 4/4 Rhino for 4 colorless and 1 green. With trample. Also has the Lieutenant ability. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Okay. That could be useful. Next we have Ordeal of Nylia, an aura enchantment for 1 colorless and 1 green. Enchants a creature. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then, if it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, sacrifice Ordeal of Nylia. When you sacrifice Ordeal of Nylia, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Okay. Next up, we have a green staple, Rampant Growth. It's a sorcery for 1 colorless and 1 green. Search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Yeah, I don't think there are many green decks that don't include Rampant Growth or something similar. Next, we have Sakura Tribe Elder, a 1/1 Snake Shaman for 1 colorless and 1 green. It can be sacrificed, which allows you to search your library for a basic land card, put that card on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Next up, we have Snake Umbra. Ooh, the Umbras are, well, back. This is a enchantment aura which targets creatures for 2 colorless and 1 green. Enchanted creature has +1/+1 and has whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. Also has the Totem Armor keyword. If enchanted creature would be destroyed instead, remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. Okay. As I recall, the Totem Armor enchantments were in a core set a while ago. I don't think I've seen them reprinted since, really. I could be mistaken, but anyway. Next up, we have Vastwood Surge, a sorcery for 3 colorless and 1 green. Has a kicker cost of 4 colorless. Search your library for 2 basic land cards, then put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. If this spell is kicked, put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Ooh. Ooh. Okay. Alright. I can remember that one. Next up, we have Rum Gully the Generous, a 3/3 legendary goblin shaman for 1 colorless, 1 red, and 1 green. Each other non-human creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Okay. And now we get some equipment. Starting off with Mage Slayer, an equipment artifact for 1 colorless, 1 red, and 1 green. Whenever an equipped creature attacks, it deals damage equal to its power to the player or planeswalker it's attacking. It has an equip cost of 3. Okay. Then we've got Rhythm of the Wild. It's an enchantment, a favorite of mine for the last few years. It costs 1 colorless, 1 red, and 1 green. This is from originally from War of the Spark. Creature spells you control can't be countered. Ooh, love that. Non-token creatures you control have Riot. They enter the battlefield with either your choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste. Depending on the circumstances, you know. For example, if the creature you're casting has haste, +1/+1 counter. If you need them to attack quickly, haste. Next up, we have another commander staple, which so much of a staple it appears in every pre-constructed commander deck now. Arcane Signet. It's an artifact for 2 colorless. It can be tapped, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Like it's useful for the fact of just kind of tap and I'm tapping this for red or I'm tapping for green or blue, whatever. Next up, we have the Fire Shrieker. It's a equipment artifact for 3 colorless with an equip cost of 2. The equipped creature has double strike, allowing it to deal both first strike and regular combat damage. Next up, we have the Soul Ring. An artifact for 1 colorless. Be tapped, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Also, a bit of a staple of commander decks. Next, we have the Swiftfoot Boots. An equipment artifact with an equip cost of 1 and a casting cost of 2. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste. Okay. Now we got some lands. These are some of them are basics, some of them are not. So the basic lands we've got mountains and are really just going to be mountains and forests. So. Now, apparently, there was an error in the in printing of this deck. One of the versions of Nissa, one of the versions of the Planeswalker Nissa, was supposed to be in the deck, but instead, another card was had 2 copies of it put it in the decks in place of her. It's an oopsie. I don't recall there being any, hey, if you buy it, let us know. We'll send you one. We'll send you the Nissa thing. So yeah. Anyway, next up, we've got the Command Tower, which is a land, again a staple of Commander, which only usable in Commander. It can be tapped, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Next, we've got Gruel Turf. Gruel Turf enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. You can tap it for 1 red and 1 green. The cycle of lands that include Gruel Turf are useful if for no other reason the idea of they can be tapped for 2 mana at no extra cost, at no additional cost after they're untapped. On the downside, there's the whole returning a land to your hand, but there are upsides. If say your opponent has put some kind of enchantment on one of your lands, which screws with it, like maybe for example, Blood Moon, which turns an enchanted land Blood Moon is all non-basics, but if your opponent has put something on one of your lands that makes said land detrimental to you, well, you can return it to your hand when you cast Gruel Turf, and whatever they had goes away. So, yeah. Next up, we have the Opal Palace. Another land. We tap to add 1 colorless, or you can pay 1 colorless, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. If you spend this mana to cast your commander, it enters the battlefield with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of times it's been cast from the command zone this game. Now, that's another fact about Commander. Your commander starts the game in the command zone and can be cast from the command zone. If it is subsequently killed, it goes back to your command zone. You can cast it again for its casting cost plus an additional 2 colorless mana. So, kind of have to be a little careful with that. Next up, we have the Aki Battle Squad, a 6/6 Goblin Samurai for 5 colorless and 1 red. Whenever one or more modified creatures you control attack, untap all modified creatures you control. After this combat phase, there's an additional combat phase. This ability triggers only once each turn. Okay, alright. There was a recent Good Morning Magic where Gavin Verhey talked about the phrase this ability triggers only once each turn as a means of trying to potentially rein in infinite combos. Anyway, moving on, we have Collision of Realms, a sorcery for 6 colorless and 1 red. Each player shovels all creatures they own into their library. Each player who shoveled a non-token creature into their library this way reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card, then puts that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. Okay. Then we've got Kami of Celebration, a 3/3 spirit for 4 colorless and 1 red. Whenever a modified creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Okay, alright. Next, we have Komainu Battle Armor, a 2/2 artifact equipment dog artifact creature for 2 colorless and 1 red. Yeah, it's an artifact creature and its equipment. Okay. It has a oh, okay. So first off, it has Menace. Equipped creature has +2/+2 and has Menace. Whenever it or the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, go each creature that player controls. It has a reconfigure ability. Reconfigure for 4 colorless. Attach a target creature you control or unattach from a creature. Reconfigure only as a sorcery. While attached, this isn't a creature. Okay, alright. So basically an equip class of 4. Next, we have Smoke Spirit's Aid, a colorless for X colorless and 1 red. A sorcery. For each of up to X target creatures, create a red aura enchantment token named Snake Blessing attached to that creature. Those tokens have enchant creature, and when enchanted creature dies, it deals 1 damage to its controller, and you create a treasure token. Okay. This is followed up by an aura enchantment, a creature enchantment, Unquenchable Fury, which costs 2 colorless and 1 red. Enchanted creature has, whenever this creature attacks, it deals X damage to defending player, where X is the number of cards in your hand, or in their hand. When Unquenchable Fury is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return it to your hand. Oof, that's always fun. Next, we have Ascendant Acolyte, a 1/1 human monk for 4 colorless mana and 1 green. It enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each +1/+1 counter among other creatures you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, double the number of +1/+1 counters on Ascendant Acolyte. Woo! Woo! That's, yeah. Next, we've got Concord with the Kami. Green enchantment for 3 colorless and 1 green. At the beginning of your end step, choose 1 or more. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or with a counter on it. Draw a card if you control an enchanted creature. Create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token if you control an equipped creature. Okay. Next up, we have Kosei, Penitent Warlord, a legendary Ogre Samurai 0/5 for 1 colorless, and 2 green. As long as Kosei Penitent Warlord is enchanted, equipped, and has a counter on it, Kosei has whenever he deals damage to an opponent, you draw that many cards, and Kosei deals that much damage to each other opponent. Okay, alright. That's cool. I like it. Then we got 1 with the Kami. A creature enchantment with flash for 3 colorless and 1 green. Flash means it can be played at anytime you play an instant. Whenever an enchanted creature or another modified creature you control dies, create X 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens where X is that creature's power. Okay. Next, we've got Rampant Rejuvenator. A 0/0 plant hydra for 3 colorless and 1 green. Enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it. When it dies, search your library for up to X basic land card where X is Rampant Rejuvenator's power, then put them on the battlefield, then shuffle. Okay. This is followed up by the instant Silk Guard, which costs X colorless and 1 green. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures you control. Okay. Oh, auras, equipment, and modified creatures you control gain hexproof until end of turn. I thought it was reminder text at the bottom first. Next up, we have Tanuki Transplanter, a 2/4 equipment dog artifact creature for 3 colorless and 1 green. Whenever it or equipped creature attacks at an amount of green mana equal to its power, until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases ends. It has a reconfigure cost of 3. Okay. Next, we have the Agitator Ant, a 2/2 insect for 2 colorless and 1 red. At the beginning of your end step, each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. Goad each creature that had counters put on it this way. Okay. Next, you've got Chain Reaction, a sorcery for 2 colorless and 2 red. Deals X damage to each creature where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. That could be... yeah. This is followed up by Chaos Warp, an instant for 2 colorless and 1 red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. Okay. Next, we have Elemental Mastery, a creature enchantment for 3 colorless and 1 red. Enchanted creature has tap. Create X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste, where X is this creature's power. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. Okay. This is followed by Goblin Raise Runners, 3/4 Goblin Warrior for 2 colorless and 2 red. 1 colorless, 1 red, sacrifice a land, put a +1/+1 counter on Goblin Raise Runners. At the beginning of your end step, you may have Goblin Raise Runners deal damage equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on it to target player or planeswalker. Okay. I'm thinking that may actually have been from the last Ravaged block. Raise Runners sounds like something that would have been in that, or it could still just be a something that was made just, it's only been popped up in Commander decks or Commander products. Next up, we have Krenko, 10th Street Kingpin, a legendary 1/2 goblin for 2 colorless and 1 red. This is the second version of Krenko to be made in the game. There was also Krenko Mob Boss. But whenever Krenko 10th Street Kingpin attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it, then create a number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. Krenko Mob Boss, his whole shtick was he can be tapped to create a number of 1/1 red goblin tokens for every goblin you control. It can make for quite the goblin swarm. Next up, we have Ox of Agonis, a 4/2 Ox for 3 colorless and 2 red. When it enters the battlefield, discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. Escape, 2 red, exile 8 other cards from your graveyard. You may cast this card from your graveyard for its escape cost. Ox of Agonis enters, escapes with a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, alright. Next, we've got Shifting Shadow. Creature enchantment for 2 colorless and 1 red. Enchanted creature has haste, and at the beginning of your upkeep, destroy this creature. Reveal cards at the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield and attach Shifting Shadow to it. Then put all other cards revealed this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay, alright. Then we've got Starstorm. An instant for X colorless and 2 red. Starstorm deals X damage to each creature. Cycling, 3. Cycling, for this case, you pay 3, discard this card from your hand, and then draw a card. Next, we have the Turian Mauler, a 2/2 shapeshifter for 2 colorless and 2 red. It has changeling, so it's every creature type. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Turian Mauler. Okay. Then we have the Bear Umbra, which is a creature enchantment for 2 colorless and 2 green. When an enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has whenever this creature attacks, untap all lands you control. That's a huge deal there. It also has like Snake Umbra, it also has the Totem Armor ability. So you just get rid of this to avoid avoid the enchanted creature's destruction. Next up, we have Champion of Lamholt, which I believe was initially in Innistrad Midnight Hunt. A 1/1 human warrior for 1 colorless and 2 green. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lamholt's power can't block creatures you control. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lamholt. That's useful. I've actually got a Celestia deck I'm working on with that does include her among others. So yeah. Next up, we've got Forgotten Ancient, a 0/3 elemental for 3 colorless and 1 green. Whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Forgotten Ancient. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of +1/+1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures. That's kind of neat. And gives you potentially gives you much more modified creatures to work with. Next, we have Genesis Hydra, a 0/0 plant Hydra for X colorless and 2 green. When you cast a spell, reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put a non-land permanent card with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield, then shuffle the rest of it into your library. Genesis Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Okay. Then we've got Primeval Protector, a 10/10 art avatar for 10 colorless and 1 green. This spell costs 1 colorless less to cast for each creature your opponents control. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. Okay, alright. That's useful. That's very useful. Next up, we have Rishkar, Pima Renegade, a 2/2 legendary elf druid for 2 colorless and 1 green. When Rishkar enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Each creature you control with a counter on it has tap, add 1 green. Okay. Then we've got Rishkar's Expertise, a sorcery for 4 colorless and 2 green. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. You may cast a spell with mana value 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Okay, that can be useful. Then we have Shamanic Revelation, a sorcery for 3 colorless and 2 green. Allows you to draw a card for each creature you control. And we have Ferocious. You gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. This is from the Tarkir block. I'm not entirely certain which set in the Tarkir block. Next up, we've got Soul's Majesty, a sorcery for 4 colorless and 1 green. Draw cards equal to the power of the target creature you control. Okay. Next up, we got the Spearbreaker Behemoth, a 5/5 beast with indestructible for 5 colorless and 2 green. 1 colorless. Target creature with power 5 or greater gains indestructible until end of turn. Ooh, okay, alright. Then we've got the Whip Tongue Hydra, a 4/4 lizard Hydra for 5 colorless, with reach for 5 colorless and 1 green. When Whip Tongue Hydra enters the battlefield, destroy all creatures with flying. Put a +1/+1 counter on Whip Tongue Hydra for each creature destroyed this way. Oh, nice! I like it. Okay. Next up, we have Decimate, a sorcery for 2 colorless, 1 red and 1 green. Destroy target artifact, target creature, target enchantment, and target land. Ooh, just kind of mess up everything, without you? This is followed up by Ulash to the Hate Seed, a 0/0 legendary Hellion Hydra for 2 colorless and 1 red and 1 green. Ulash the Hate Seed enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each other red creature you control, and a +1/+1 counter on it for each other green creature you control. For the cost of 1 colorless mana, and removing a +1/+1 counter from Ulash, you may choose one. Ulash deals 1 damage to target creature, or create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. Okay. Next up, we have a Black Blade Reforged, a legendary equipment artifact for 2 colorless. It has 2 separate equip costs. It has a legendary creature equip cost of 3 or otherwise 7. But the equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Okay. This is followed up by Bone Horde, a equipment artifact for 4 with the Living Weapon ability for 4 colorless. Living Weapon. When this equipment enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 black Phyrexian germ creature token, then attach this to it. Equipped creature gets +X/+X, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards. It has an equip cost of 2, so you can move it from the germ token onto something else if you want. The Living Weapon equipment, if I remember correctly, popped up initially in New Phyrexia. So, next we have Sword of Vengeance, an artifact equipment for 3 with an equip cost of 3 or casting cost of 3. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has first strike, vigilance, trample, and haste. Okay. Then we've got Cindergate Blade. It's a mountain forest, so it generates with red or green mana. Cinderglade enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Okay. Then we've got Exotic Orchard. Be tapped, add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. Alright, okay. Then we've got Game Trail. As it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a mountain or forest card from your hand. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and it can be tapped to add 1 red or 1 green. Then we've got Mossfire Valley, which for 1 colorless can be tapped for 1 red and 1 green. Ah, okay, Mossfire Valley was the one that got with 2 copies in it. Okay. Next up, we've got Oren Reef, the Vastwood, which enters the battlefield tapped, and it can be tapped for either 1 to add 1 green or to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that enters the battlefield this turn. Okay, alright. This is followed by Raging Ravine. Enters the battlefield tapped, to be tapped for either 1 red or 1 green, or 2 colorless, 1 red, 1 green. Until end of turn, Raging Ravine becomes a 3/3 red and green elemental creature with whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's still a land. Okay? Not the biggest fan of turning lands into creatures, but, you know, I get the idea. Next, we have the Temple of Abandon. Which enters the battlefield tapped. Ooh, almost dropped it there. And when it enters the battlefield, you scry 1. And it can be tapped for either 1 red or 1 green. Temple of Abandon, if I remember correctly, came out of the Theros block. The Satyr Planeswalker, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, ascended to godhood and became the god of revels. Temple of Abandon is a temple dedicated to him. But then we have we have mountains and we have forests, which, yeah, those are, well, basic lands, so basic information. Har har. Okay, so that's our first Neon Dynasty Commander deck. So one thing I will go ahead and just let out of the bag, I am planning to start doing a similar segment, maybe not as often, but still fairly often, focusing on Magic decks. And currently, the idea that I have for a name is for said segment is Stacking the Deck. However, I do recognize that's a name that does carry some negative connotations. So if you got an idea for the segment, by all means, hit me up. Let me know in the comments. But you'll probably be seeing some of the cards we crack open today in Commander decks, either in whatever the segment ends up being called. So now we're moving on to the Buckle Up Commander deck. Okay. So Buckle Up focuses largely on vehicles. If I remember correctly, vehicles were introduced way back in Kaladesh. But there have been some modifications to the vehicle mechanic introduced in this set. So, okay. All right. So first off, we start with, of course, our the primary commander for the deck, Kotori, Pilot Prodigy, a legendary 2/4 Moonfolk pilot for 1 colorless, 1 white, and 1 blue. White and blue is generally referred to as Azorius. Again, if you're unaware. But vehicles you control have crew 2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target artifact creature you control gains lifelink and vigilance until end of turn. Okay, alright. Next we have Shorakai, Genesis Engine, an 8/8 legendary artifact vehicle for 2 colorless, 1 white, and 1 blue. Has a crew value of 8. 1 colorless, tap, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. Create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this creature crew's vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. Okay. So it's a 1/1 against pilot crew vehicles as though it had power +2. So basically 3. Alright. And it can be Shorakai can be your commander. But it appears to be a mech suit. Dude, friggin' mech suits in Magic the Gathering. Who knew? Who would have thought, right? Next, we have Imperial Recovery Unit. A 3/4 artifact vehicle artifact for 2 colorless and 1 white. You have a crew cost of 2. Whenever it attacks, return target creature or vehicle card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. Okay. Next is Mobilizer Mech. A 3/4 vehicle with flying and crew 3 for 1 colorless and 1 blue. Whenever it becomes crewed, up to one other target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. I've heard there's some pretty janky stuff being done with that one. So yeah. Next up, we've got Prodigy's Prototype, a 3/4 vehicle artifact with a crew cost of 2 and casting cost of 1 colorless, 1 white, and 1 blue. Whenever one or more vehicles you control attack, create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with cruise vehicles of Zod power or 2 greater. Okay. Then we have Aeronaut Admiral, a 3/1 human pilot for 3 colorless and 1 white. I'm wanting to say this was probably originally from Kaladesh. Could be wrong. But it's got flying, and vehicles you control have flying. Next is Armed and Armored, an instant for 1 white, colorless and 1 white. Vehicles you control become artifact creatures until end of turn. Choose a dwarf you control, attach any number of equipment you control to it. Okay? Next up, we have Crush Contraband, an instant for 3 colorless and 1 white. Choose one or both. Exile target artifact, exile target enchantment. Okay? Followed by Dispatch, an instant for 1 white. Tap target creature. Metalcraft, if you control 3 or more artifacts, exile that creature. Okay? Very useful for this deck, I'd say. Next up is Generous Gift, an instant for 2 colorless and 1 white. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Okay? Next up is Mirror Smith, a 2/1 human artificer for 1 colorless and 1 red. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token. Then we have Swords to Plowshares. An instant for 1 white. Allows you to exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to the exiled creature's power. Then we have Ethereum Sculptor, a 1/2 Vedalken Artificer artifact creature for 1 colorless and 1 blue, and a cornerstone of most artifact decks. As artifacts you control, you cast cost 1 less to cast. Okay. Next, we have Reality Shift, an instant for 1 colorless and 1 blue. Exile target creature. Its controller manifests the top card of their library. That player puts the top card of their library onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature. If it's a creature card, it can be turned face up at any time for its mana cost. Okay? This is followed by Riddlesmith, a 2/1 human artificer for 1 colorless and 1 blue. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Then we have Thoughtcast, a sorcery for 4 colorless and 1 blue. Affinity for artifacts, which it costs 1 colorless mana less for each artifact you control, and allows you to draw 2 cards. Okay. It's followed up by Vedalken Engineer, a 1/1 Vedalken Artificer for 1 colorless and 1 blue. Tap. Add 2 mana of any color, or of any 1 color. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activated abilities of artifacts. Okay. Followed by Whirler Rogue, a 2/2 human rogue artificer for 2 colorless and 2 blue. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. Tap 2 artifacts you control. Target creature can be blocked this turn. And it creates 2 artifacts you can tap. Okay then. Next, we have Arcanist Owl, a 3/3 bird for 4 mana and a combination of either blue or white. Has flying. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact or enchantment card from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay. This is followed by Wrath Capuchin, Ship's Mage, a legendary human wizard for a legendary 3/3 human wizard with flash and flying for 2 colorless, 1 white, and 1 blue. Part of the new Weatherlight crew introduced in the Dominaria set. You may cast historic spells as though they had flash. Artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. Okay. Then we've got another Arcane Signet. We got an Azorius Signet. Okay. Artifact for 2 colorless. It can be tapped for 1 colorless. You can tap it and add 1 white and 1 blue. These signets are incredibly useful. Just saying. Next we have Colossal Plow. A vehicle artifact. A 6/3 vehicle artifact for 2 with a crew cost of 6. Whenever it attacks, add 3 white and you gain 3 life. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Okay. Alright. Then we have Felwar Stone. An artifact for 2 which can be tapped to add 1 mana of any color an opponent that a land an opponent controls could produce. Okay. Next up we have Foundry Inspector, a 3/2 artifact creature construct artifact creature for 3. Okay. Yes. And they makes artifact spells you cast cost 1 mana less to cast. Okay. We got ourselves a Gold Mirror. It's a 1/1 mirror artifact creature for 2 that can be tapped to add 1 white. The mirror that generate colored mana are so useful. This is followed up by Raider's Carve, a 4/4 vehicle with a crew of 3 for 3 mana. Originally from the Kaldheim set. Whenever it attacks, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped. Okay. Alright. Next, we've got the Shimmer Mirror, a 2/2 mirror artifact creature for 3 with flash, which allows you to cast artifact spells as though they had flash. Okay. Then there's the Silver Mirror, a 1/1 mirror for 2 that generates 1 blue mana when it's tapped. We got another Soul Ring. Then we have the Aerial Surveyor, a 3/4 vehicle with flying, crew of 2, and casting cost of 2 colorless and 1 white. Whenever it attacks, if defending player controls more lands than you, search your library for a basic plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Okay. Then we have Drum Bellower, a 2/1 spirit with flying for 2 colorless and 1 white. Untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step. Oh, I like him. I like that. Next we have Iron Soul Enforcer, a 4/4 human samurai artifact creature for 4 colorless and 1 white. Whenever Iron Soul Enforcer or a commander you control attacks alone, return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, I have to admit, I'm not surprised to not see the return of Bushido. It was not a very popular mechanic, but I was still a little disappointed. Next up, we have Organic Extinction, a sorcery with Improvise, allowing you to tap artifacts to pay part of the mana cost for 8 colorless and 2 white. So like I said, it's Improvise, so you can tap up to 8 artifacts to just make it to lower the full mana cost. Destroy all non-artifact creatures. Ooh. Next up, we have Release to Memory, an instant for 3 colorless and 1 white. Exile target opponent's graveyard. For each creature card exiled this way, create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. Alright, okay. Next, we have Swift Reconfiguration. It is a creature or vehicle enchantment with flash for 1 white. Enchanted Permanent is a vehicle artifact with crew 5 and loses all other card types. It's not a creature unless it's crewed. Okay. Next up we have Access Denied, an instant for 3 colorless and 2 blue. Counter target spell, create X 1/1 colorless stopper artifact creature tokens with flying where X is that spell's mana value. Okay. This is followed by the Cyberdrive Awakener, a 4/4 construct artifact creature with flying for 5 colorless and 1 blue. Other artifact creatures you control have flying. When Cyberdrive Awakener enters the battlefield, until end of turn, each non-creature artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/4. Okay. Oh, I can see a definite use there. Next up, we've got the Imposter Mech, a 3/1 vehicle artifact with crew of 3 for 1 colorless and 1 blue. You may have Imposter Mech enter the battlefield with a copy of a creature on opponent controls, except it's a vehicle artifact with crew 3 and it loses all other creature card types. Okay. Next up, we have the Kappa Cannoneer, a 4/4 artifact creature with Ward 9 and Turtle Warrior for 5 colorless and 1 blue. Also has Improvise, so it can be you can tap other artifacts to help pay the mana. Or, no, Ward 4, not 9, 4. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Kappa Cannoneer and it can't be blocked this turn. I do not recall exactly what Ward does, and it doesn't give you there's no reminder text on it here, of Ward, so yeah. Next up is Katsumasa the Animator, a 3/3 legendary artifact, or not artifact, but Moonfolk Artificer with flying for 2 colorless and 2 blue. For 2 colorless and 1 blue, until end of turn, target non-creature artifact you control becomes an artifact creature and gains flying. If it's not a vehicle, it has base power toughness 1/1 until end of turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 3 target non-creature artifacts. Okay, alright. We've got Research Thief, a 3/3 Moonfolk Wizard artifact creature with flash and flying for 4 colorless and 1 blue. Whenever an artifact creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Okay. Then we have Universal Surveillance, a sorcery for X colorless and 3 blue with Improvise, which allows you to draw X cards. Okay. Then we've got Surge Hacker Mech, a 5/5 vehicle artifact with Menace and Crew 4 for 4 mana. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to twice the number of vehicles you control to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Okay. Then we've got Cataclysmic Gearhulk, a 4/5 construct artifact creature with vigilance for 3 colorless and 2 white. When it enters the battlefield, each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, then sacrifices the rest. Ooh. Ooh. Alright. We got Indomitable Archangel, a 4/4 angel with flying and metalcraft for 2 colorless and 2 white. The metalcraft ability, artifacts you control have Shroud as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. Okay? That's always nice. Then we have Parhelion 2, a 5/5 legendary vehicle artifact with flying, first strike, and vigilance, and crew of 4 for the casting cost of 6 colors and 2 white. Whenever it attacks, create 2 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance that are attacking. Okay. They can't be tapped. They're not tapped and attacking, they have vigilance, but yeah. Next up, we have SRAM, Senior Edificer, a legendary dwarf advisor with a legendary 2/2 dwarf advisor for 1 colorless and 1 white. Whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. Okay. Then we've got Tishar, Ancestor's Apostle, A 2/2 legendary bird cleric with flying for 3 colorless and 1 white. Whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Okay. Then we've got Emery, Lurker of the Loch, a legendary merfolk wizard for 1 color, with a legendary 1/2 merfolk wizard for 2 colorless and 1 blue. Costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. And when it enters the battlefield, mill 4 cards. So you put 4 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. Then you can tap Emery. Choose target artifact in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. Still pay its cost. Timing rules still apply. Okay. Terms and conditions apply. Next we have Jace, Architect of Thought. A blue planeswalker with 4 loyalty for 2 colorless and 2 blue. We've got 3 abilities. For if you add 1 loyalty counter, until your next turn, whenever a creature an opponent controls attacks, it gets -2/-2 until end of turn. If you remove 2, reveal the top card of your library. An opponent, the top 3 cards of your library. An opponent separates these cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library in any order. -8. For each player, search that player's library for a non-land card and exile it. Then that player shuffles. You may cast these cards without paying their mana costs. That's always nice. Free stuff. Then we have Master of Ethereum, a Vedalken wizard artifact creature for 2 colorless and 1 blue. Power toughness equals the number of artifacts you control. And other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. Okay. Next we have Psi Matrithopterist, a 1/4 legendary human artificer for 2 colorless and 1 blue. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. 1 colorless, 1 white, or 1 blue. Sacrifice 2 artifacts. Draw a card. Okay. Next, we have Thopter Spy Network, an enchantment for 2 colorless and 2 blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, create a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. Okay. This is followed up by Dance of the Manse, a sorcery for X colorless, 1 white, and 1 blue. Return up to X target artifact and or non-aura enchantment card each with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If X is 6 or more, these permanents are 4/4 creatures in addition to their other types. Okay. Next up we have Hannah, Ship's Navigator. A 1/2 legendary human artificer for 1 colorless, 1 white, and 1 blue. For 1 colorless, 1 white, 1 blue, and tapping Hannah, return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. As I recall, yeah, she's part of, that's new artwork for Hannah. Okay, cool. Next up we have Cultivators Caravan. A 5/5 vehicle artifact with crew 3 for 3 mana. We tap to add 1 mana of any color. Okay. Then we got Mirage Mirror. An artifact for 2. Or 3 mana. For 2 mana, Mirage Mirror becomes a copy of target artifact, creature, or enchantment, or land until end of turn. Okay. Next up we have Peace Walker Colossus, a 6/6 vehicle artifact with crew of 4 for 3 mana. For 1 colorless and 1 white, another target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. Okay, I like all the ones that you kind of say, yeah, make it a creature. Next up, Sky Sovereign's Console Flagship, a 6/5 legendary vehicle with flying and crew 3 for 5 mana. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Okay. Next up we have Smuggler's Copter, a 3/3 vehicle artifact with flying and crew 1 for 2. Whenever it attacks or blocks, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Sorry about the length of this. I should have just done a video for each of the decks, but, well, dumb. I have it dumb sometimes. Next up, you have Solemn Simulacrum, a 2/2 golem artifact creature for 4. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. When it dies, when Solemn Simulacrum dies, you may draw a card. Okay. Then we have the Weatherlight, a 4/5 flying vehicle with legendary vehicle artifact with a crew of 3 for 4 mana. Whenever Weatherlight deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay? Alright. Then we got our Exotic Orchard. Okay. We got Port Town. It's a land that generates that can be tapped for either white or blue. As it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a plains or islands card from your hand. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. Okay. Prairie Stream. It's a plains and island. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Skycloud Expanse, which is a land for 1 colorless, can be tapped for both 1 white and 1 blue. Spire of Industry should be tapped for 1 colorless, or you can tap it and pay 1 life and add 1 mana of any color, but you can only activate that if you control an artifact. Okay. Finally, we have the Temple of Enlightenment, which enters the battlefield tapped. When it does so, you scry 1, and it can be tapped for either 1 white or 1 blue. Alright, and then the rest are all lands we've seen: the Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, plus we got our basic plains and islands, since white, blue. But anyway, that's going to do it for now. Sorry about the length of this. Like I said, I really should have just done 1 video for each deck, but I've never done this for a commander deck, so trial and error, you know? Anyway, that'll do it for now. As always, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Links to my Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, and PayPal can be found in the description box down below. This is Rock and Roll Spock signing off, saying live long and rock hard.